started as a normal day, just like any other. I took a shower and grabbed a quick cup of coffee before heading out of the front door and waving goodbye to my loving wife. I jumped on board the bus, sat down, turned on my MP3 player, and promptly entered my usual daydream state. I finally arrived at my office building, headed up the 10th floor, and sat down at my desk to see a huge pile of paperwork. I sighed and got started. A scream coming from down the hall broke my concentration. I considered going to see what it was, but the thought quickly passed. Probably just another hysterical secretary overreacting to a spider. Just as I started getting back to work, something else grabbed my attention. I peered out the window into the street below, and to my astonishment, saw a scene of utter chaos. People fighting, even killing each other for seemingly no reason. By this time, some of my coworkers had gotten up from their desks and joined me in staring out the window. The radio began blurting out all kinds of information. It said that a new breed of virus had been discovered, one that would change its victims into a homicidal maniac. This virus was highly contagious and spreading rapidly. Their advice was to stay where I was, and that if I were to encounter an infected person, I should try to destroy their brain. At this point, I felt myself entering a state of mild shock. It was obvious that whatever was going on was serious, and that a significant percentage of the population were going to be killed or wounded over the course of the next few days. My thoughts quickly turned to my wife. Was she okay? What if these maniacs were near our home? I dialed the number, but immediately got an error tone. I tried several more times before giving up. I was annoyed with myself for wasting time. I should have known the phones would be overwhelmed. I then decided that I would go home and make sure that my wife was okay. I began to make my way through a series of corridors that lead to the elevator. On my way, I noticed a struggle out of the corner of my eye. I turned to see a disfigured man frantically clawing at and biting a young woman's leg. Blood was already pouring from her multiple wounds. The woman cried out for me to help her. I began to look for somebody to help, but all of my fellow coworkers seemed to be far more interested in saving their own skins. By the time we returned to the office, both the crazed man and the wounded woman had gone. I decided to continue to the elevator. I arrived at the elevator, but to my dismay it seemed many other people had the same idea. I heard a ping and the elevator doors slid open. In a split second, the large crowd of office staff pushed and shoved their way into the tiny metal box. I quickly made my way down the stairs to the ground floor. Sure, I was a little out of breath, but at least I saved time and avoided a potentially lethal situation. I eventually reached the ground floor and entered the lobby. The scene in front of me was one of extreme violence. The security team was desperately battling with a swarm of infected, and they appeared to be losing. I watched helplessly as a guard on the opposite side of the room was torn limb from limb. I noticed his gun lying on the floor just a few meters away from his dismembered corpse. I managed to slip away without any infected noticing and proceeded quickly towards the rear exit. I made my way through several corridors towards the back of the building. As I approached the rear entrance, I spotted a hefty padlock across the bolt, making it practically impossible to open without a key. I cursed my bad luck and tried to figure out my next move. The janitor would have had the key, but reaching his office would have required going back towards the lobby. I realized that breaking the door down would be impossible, and that heading back would be too dangerous. So I set about searching for another exit. I remembered that there was a small window in the male bathroom just a few doors down the corridor. I arrived at the bathroom door and pushed it open. Suddenly, I heard a bestial roar coming from further down the corridor. A dozen infected had spotted me and were now heading in my direction. I quickly entered the stall and spotted the window I was thinking of. However, to my dismay, it was much smaller than I had remembered. I thought that I would probably fit, but I knew it was going to be a very tricky maneuver. Not wanting to waste time, I set about trying to squeeze through the window. A few awkward movements and a lot of pain later, I managed to force my way into the street, escaping the infected with only a few seconds to spare. I dropped from the window and landed on the pavement with a heavy thud. Looking up and down the quiet back street, I tried to decide what to do next. Eventually, I came to the conclusion that my best bet was to head to a main road and try to steal a vehicle or catch a lift. I jogged down the quiet street for a few hundred feet before stopping to catch my breath. I looked up briefly and saw a little girl wandering aimlessly in the middle of the road.